Good evening, everybody. Welcome to a Dandelion Series presentation as part of the Yellow Farmhouse Education Center. We're so pleased that you're joining us tonight. My name is Jen Rothman. I'm the director of the Yellow Farmhouse Education Center. Our mission, if you're not familiar with us, is to connect people to each other and to where their food comes from through food and farm-based education. And lately that has looked a lot like this, conversations that we're doing virtually to share stories and ideas and conversations about food that hopefully changes perspective. And we call the series the Dandelion Series because it's part of our logo. We chose it, the dandelion in particular, because it's such an interesting flower that often gets a sort of bad reputation as a weed. And when you really look at a dandelion and you think about its value, you can have a completely different perspective and see it instead of a weed, see it as a plant that has tremendous nutritional value, that's been used for generations and generations as food or medicine, a plant whose taproot helps to loosen our soil for farmers and for other plants to grow. A plant whose flower is so necessary for bees and for the early sources of nectar for pollinators. And a plant whose seed head provides such nostalgia and sense of connection and memory to nature for so many of us who as a kid and even as an adult remember blowing the seeds off the seed head. And so the conversations that we have through the Dandelion series are meant to kind of do just that, which is to hopefully help us take a deeper look at an idea or a conversation or thought around food and maybe change or deepen our perspective. And so tonight's conversation, I am so thrilled about because I find that the conversation around seeds is often either like not talked about or kind of misunderstood. And so when we were connected with Sefra Alexandra, we started to think about the kinds of ways that we could bring her story and her conversation to all of you. And so we're so pleased that she's joining us. She's worked in seed conversation for a decade on the international, national, and local level. And tonight she's going to be talking about those three facets, all in an effort to support biodiversity and a more secure food system. She's the leader of the Pollinator Health Initiative for Connecticut NOFA, which is how we connected with one another, and which she'll talk about more later on tonight. And that's the Ecotype project that was also part of the title of this program. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Sefra to the program. I'm going to bring her into the stream here. Hi, Sefra. How are you?
Great. Thank you so much for having me, Jen. Am I here?
Yeah, you were muted for just a second at the beginning, but we can hear you now.
Okay, great. Well, Jen, thank you so much for having me. I'm so supportive of everything that the Yellow Farmhouse does. And as a seed saver and the Seed Huntress, your logo is near and dear to my heart. I love the seeds that are attached to those papaces. That I love fancy words, and animockery is a great word that means the dispersal of seed by wind. So
can you say that word again, animocracy?
Animockery. I have it spelled out on one of my slides later.
Oh, perfect. I'm going to make a note of that later. I love it. Yeah, well, I think I'm going to take myself out of the screen so that you can begin, and I'm going to work the slides from backstage, but be available to you if you have any questions, and I'll pop in and out as needed to help facilitate.
Fantastic. All right, so we are going to get started here with a slideshow that I've prepared. So I call myself Seed Huntress, and for the past decade or so, as Jen had mentioned, I have been doing seed conservation work all across the globe. I've been working on the international scale, the national scale, and local scale. So I'd like to briefly take you through that just so you can get an idea of what preserving and conserving our food and our global germplasm for seed biodiversity looks like in different places for different purposes and different reasons. So the next slide shows some of the, let's see. So I was grateful to be featured in Forbes as someone who's on the hunt for biodiversity. What this image shows is when I was doing field work in the South Pacific for the Crop Trust. And I'm really, just to start off this evening, honored to be doing this work, because to me, seeds are these magic embryos that we can hold in our hand, that when people migrate from different areas and and they travel, they bring the taste of home with them, because when they plant those seeds and they taste those heirlooms that they carry, they're reminded of the terroir, the soils where they're from. And it's the same thing that our pollinator friends and insects do as well. They're stewarding and caretaking the land. So as seed savers and caretakers, we are really helping preserve and pass on all of the great stewardship that's happened for time immemorial before us, for all those that will come after us. So the next slide, as we're talking about a food secure future, first let's really zoom out and look at the macro scale, right? And what this map begins to illustrate is the work of Nikolai Vavilov. He was a Russian botanist who was one of the first people who said, you want to know what? There's all of this amazing seed diversity anywhere in the world, but it's not being safeguarded. And what happens if there's man-made or natural disasters and they get wiped out from the lands that they're from? So he went on all of these amazing botanical expeditions and was the first person who really started gathering all of these arcs of diversity and storing them in a seed bank. So if you go to the next slide, we can start to think about, maybe you've heard of seed banks, right? They have that picture up in the left-hand corner is the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. And what that does is it's ex situ, which is a fancy word for cold storage, meaning seeds stored away from where they locally grow. It's an ex situ repository for all of the countries of the world. So as you saw that map that expressed the different centers of origin, where crops first emerge on the planet is where they have greatest arcs of diversity. And so those different countries like maize and wheat in Mexico, potatoes in Peru, they all have aggregated their seed collections and sent a backup storage copy to Svalbard. The first time seeds had to be accessed from Svalbard was during civil unrest in Syria when the seed bank was actually bombed, and they had to check out seeds from seed banks to multiply that diversity back in their fields to once again have that genetic material that has been adapted over thousands of years to be the best suited for that place. And once they had regrown those seeds, they were able to resend back seeds to the seed vault. So as you can see, you'll see what seeds look like in some of these seed vaults, just gorgeous. I mean, there's for every variety of rice and corn and everything you can think of, there's so many different colors, and it's just this exquisite display. Seeds that are adapted to highlands, lowlands, certain pests, not certain pests. And the thing when we're talking about a food secure future is we never know which of those genetic traits or which of those adaptations we'll need to breed in to adapt to whatever the climate changes towards. So up above as well, you'll see in vitro fertilization. So if you think of most of the seeds in the Northeast, we think of those dry, desiccated seeds. Those are orthodox seeds. Those are seeds that can be kept cool, dark, dry, and their viability for different species vary, can last for 10, 100, thousands of years. We hear about these date palms that regerminate after so long in some of these conditions. But for a lot of the tropics in different parts of the world, those are recalcitrant. They can't ever desiccate or dry out, or they'll lose their viability. So up in those little vials, that's called in vitro, and that's taro, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And those have to be kept as living plantlets in a medium that inhibits their growth, but that is the genetic material used in rebreeding. So the Crop Trust is the organization, it's based out of Germany, a very small organization that oversees our global seed banking system. And I was chosen as one of 7 fellows to do impact assessment, basically telling the world why these seed banks and what they do is so important. The Crop Trust is a wonderful organization. They also run a Food Forever initiative, which is worth mentioning on this talk, because what they're trying to do is really highlight and bring back in rare and forgotten foods and bring them back into the culinary conversation to make sure that they're safeguarded and not lost. So the next slide will show you those seed banks that I were talking about. So there's 12 main seed banks based on those centers of origin. You can see maize and wheat stored in Mexico. And as I said, the potatoes in Peru, the agroforestry centers in Kenya, the rice at Erie, that's in the Philippines. So you can really start to see where these seed banks preserve this global diversity. The 13th circle that you see right above Australia is CPACT, and that is the World Center for Taro, that crop I had mentioned. And that's where I went to do my field work for the Crop Trust as a Gene Bank Impacts Fellow. So the next slide you can see is this beautiful crop taro. As an ethnobotanist, I spend my career looking at plants and their relationship to people. So in the South Pacific, which is a very traditional society, there's still chiefdoms and lots of, well, if we think about the word agriculture, culture is deeply embedded into that. And so taro is really this keystone crop for them. It's given in rituals of birth and marriage, when chiefs are coronated. It's their staple food crop. It's actually the 14th most eaten vegetable in the world. For a lot of subsistence farming nations, it's hugely important. The aroid, or the big root, is edible. The petioles, the leaves, it is delicious and really great for a number of health issues. For people with diabetes, it's one of the cleanest starches. There's so many wonderful attributes. But in 1993, the taro leaf blight came ashore in the South Pacific, and within just a few months, their entire crop was completely wiped out. Now, if you think about the fact that this is their main economic export and their main foodstuffs, this is a huge devastating issue. It was the South Pacific's version of the Irish potato famine. So when I went to do my field work, I went and focused on this story. So the next slide, along with writing a peer-reviewed article, I also, in an effort to make this information more known and more accessible to people beyond those already interested in plant conservation and so forth, I created a cartoon. So right now we're going to watch this 3-minute cartoon that kind of tells the tale of taro as we were on the trail of taro leaf blight. So here we go.
Sorry, I'm going to come back in because I have to be here on the screen so that the audio works. So I'm going to go ahead and share that now.
Taro, a sacred crop woven into creation stories, legends, and lore across Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands. For nearly 28,000 years, sustaining migrating peoples throughout the world. Cultivated, cherished, and revered over the centuries, whole cultures thrived on the sustenance of this life-giving vegetable, the 14th most eaten in the world. The food of coronation feasts, babies' first meals, esteemed gifts to honor life's milestones of birth, marriage, death. Then one day, tragedy struck when in 1993, the taro leaf blight came ashore in Samoa. The fungus spread rapidly, devastating the entire island's crops and economy, drastically altering daily life within just a few months. Botanists the world over rallied around this agricultural disaster and went on global expeditions to regather blight-resistant Colocasia esculenta varieties of taro. They brought 2,200 plants back to Fiji, where the Regional Germplasm Center, the Pacific's first seed bank, was founded to safeguard these vital genetic resources. The materials were characterized and screened for disease, and the 196 most distinct strains were preserved as the core collection. These samples were then sent to Samoa, where Tolo Ayosefa began his tireless breeding efforts. Working with farmers and local communities, he cross-pollinated the strains and identified blight-resistant, high-yielding, and good-tasting crops. After 10 years of dedicated trials, the taro fields of Samoa were thriving once again with the 5 superior blight-resistant cultivars he had developed. Samples of these prized plants were then sent back to Fiji to be conserved at the Seed Bank, now renamed the Center for Pacific Crops and Trees, or CPACT, the world's center of taro, which houses 70% of the Earth's taro diversity. Here, Tolo's famous lines stand ready with the others to be deployed when needed to restore crop production and food security for cultures around the globe. May we continue to prioritize this crucial work of safeguarding our greatest tools of resilience for all the generations yet to germinate.
All right, so as we make our way back to the PowerPoint here, hopefully that all helped to demonstrate the important work that preserving the genetic diversity does. Because as our botanical explorers had to go back out to those different centers of origin and find those blight-resistant cultivars that existed in the Bangkok swales of China and so forth, regathering all that diversity is what established that seed bank. And once you have that genetic material, it's imperative to use that for breeding so that we can ensure food security throughout the world. Like in Nigeria in 2010, when the blight hit there, they were able to send those varieties to them because there's a treaty that says all genetic material stored in these seed banks must be shared with all other countries in that treaty. And they were able to stave off famine and huge economic downturn by being able to make sure these blight-resistant cultivars were able to get back in their field very soon. So now we're still on the international scale. When we think about those international fortified seed banks, what about seed banks on the community level? So my brother and I have a company called Tactivate where we do a lot of disaster response, and I do response from the agroecological perspective, making sure that farmers have what they need where they need it. This is in the southern department of Haiti, and oftentimes after hurricanes and natural disasters in Haiti, USAID, which does wonderful work, will fly in a ton of rice. And what does that do, though? That undercuts the agroeconomic system of other places in Haiti that may still have farmers who have rice that can be bought. But when it's given for free, no one's giving them any commerce. It also brings in pests oftentimes, and also isn't viable seed. So if we want to really fortify seed sovereignty, food security, and the ability for areas to self-facilitate their own response in the face of these climatic or man-made disasters, we need to make sure that they have their own access to seed. Why? Because their seed is adapted to that place and the most suited for their climate and will do best, and also oftentimes has that palatability or the taste that the local citizens are looking for. So after working for the Branson family, I received a grant from them to fortify this community seed bank in the southern department of Haiti. And what we did with this project, if you go to the next slide, is I worked with this wonderful gentleman, the agronome Elie Saint-Magloire. And the way that his organization for the rehabilitation of the environment works is he helps mentor and give seeds and access to 25 main farm managers that then oversee thousands of other farmers within this department. So by fortifying him with the seeds that he needs where they are, when the next disaster strikes, he's able to immediately give them those seeds so that they can replant. In these subsistence farming nations, this is also a huge part of their livelihood. It's not only how they feed themselves, it's how they make money, it's how they send their kids to school, and also how they're working to rehabilitate the environment there. So I focused a lot. If you go to the next slide, we're not going to watch this video just for time's sake, but on my website, seedhuntress.com, this video lives there. But we've been working a lot with castor. Castor is a wonderful medicinal and also a great agroforestry crop. So a lot of the lands in Haiti have been denuded. And so when we support agroforestry endeavors such as this, that also have a value added aspect, castor oils used largely around the world for cosmetic and other different uses, we were able to fortify a female-led castor seed oil co-op so they're able to improve their forestry lands, be able to make money, safeguard seeds, and help proliferate their own self-facilitated resiliency. So moving on to the next slide, we are now coming back. Let's come back to our country. So now we're back in the US, and there's a lot of very arid and precarious lands that exist on our public lands. So the Millennium Seed Bank at the Botanical Gardens at Kew said we need to start safeguarding all of these rare and endangered species. If we think back to the global seed vault, the predominant seeds that are safeguarded there are our field crops, are more of our food crops, if you will. But there hasn't really been a conscientious effort to safeguard all of our wild crops. And as a forager and an herbalist, someone who appreciates the great bounty of our wildlands, this was near and dear to my heart. So working for the Seeds of Success program and the Bureau of Land Management out in Idaho, we went and using old herbaria, those dried, beautiful pressed flower plants, and old GPS coordinates of where these botanists, 50 or 70 years ago had found these populations and stands of plants. We would hike miles into the wilderness. Oftentimes, if you see the one under the microscope, Draba hitchcockii, that actually grows on these escarpment rocks in some of the largest rattlesnake territory. So after, taping cardboard around my legs, my father sent me snake gaiters and said, you need to be safe. But the point is, you really start to learn the different personalities of plants. If you look to where I'm hunting by the river, that's Primula alculina that grows in these gentle, lulling riverbanks. And it's really quite extraordinary to see the diversity that grows in the different seed zones illustrated by the map down on the right of Idaho. And so when we're talking about being food secure, we also need to make sure we're safeguarding the food for the wildlands and the insects and all the fauna that exists. So these seeds are now stored in the Millennium Seed Bank, and then the herbaria go to the Smithsonian, which helps to identify rare plants that way. So in the next slide is, as we become more hyper-localized, I'm from right near Southport, Connecticut, and the famous allium heirloom, the Southport globe onion, was proliferated all throughout my lands. All of the old families there were onion farmers, and this obviously is after it was, known as Matchamucks, the beautiful land by the Golden Hill tribe, and some of the most prolific areas of deer and all of the seafood that grows on our shores right on Long Island Sound. So since time immemorial, this has really been just beautifully productive and well caretaken agrarian land, or land harvested for foodstuffs that sustained peoples that have lived around this beautiful area. If you go to the next slide, just like the taro that I was studying in the South Pacific, these onions in 1890 also experienced a blight, and so they were completely wiped out. And if you see all the old names in our towns, pay reverence to these farmers, and you can see the massive amounts that were harvested, and 400,000 barrels were shipped on those sloops, those sailboats, to the New York City markets each year. They were pickled and given to the armies as foodstuffs to prevent scurvy. Here in the Northeast, we don't really have citrus, so this is an amazing resource for vitamin C and just a whole litany of other medicinal qualities. We were famous for inventions that modernized how onions were farmed, and had seed houses there and seed companies. But after this blight hit, that's when the era of prohibition and the Gatsbys and the more romanticized now, artisan bohemian cultures of Connecticut started coming in. So if you go to the next slide, I worked with Baker Creek Heirloom Seeds, and they were still safeguarding this heirloom. And so I welcomed it home after 130 years and revived its seed. Onions are biennial, so it takes 2 years to actually harvest the seed, and the initiative is in its third year, and so we finally have true Southport globe onions. And in an effort to proliferate that, I utilized another seed saving and seed sharing strategy by starting a community seed library at the Pequot Library in Southport, Connecticut. What seed libraries are is you can go check out seeds like you would check out a book. You plant them in your land. You let that variety go back to seed, and then you return some. What does this do? This fortifies bioregional seed sheds, saying that the seeds that we now are collectively safeguarding, like if you think of your watershed, we're thinking of seed sheds. So we want to grow and save and share seeds within our bioregion, or what we'll talk about in a little bit, our ecoregion. So this was really encouraging. We got schools involved, local farms. I now host an annual onion festival. And it's really helped to revive the great conversation about our shared agrarian history and gotten more people interested and excited about farming who maybe wouldn't be. So in the theme of this talk, a food secure future, we really need to say, how can we rally all of the community around us, like everything that Yellow Farmhouse does and Stone Acres does, to really be supporting of this community supported agriculture? Because the more seeds we have in our living local seed profiles, the more resilient and the more local food security we all have collectively. So the next slide, now that we zoomed back hyperlocal, when we talk about conservation, we zoom back out a little bit. So this is a wonderful map from the EPA that demonstrates ecoregions. So there was foresters and hydrologists and soil scientists and all of these different people who worked in conservation, and they were using slightly different maps. And if we put on our bug eyes or we look through the lens of the fauna, they don't see Connecticut and Massachusetts. What they see are these broad stroke painterly habitat mosaics that express where the riparian corridors are, or the broadleaf forests, and so forth. And so this map was created. James Obernick has written some amazing papers on it. I encourage you to read his work. But what we are saying is conservation needs to be done within this type of a framework. So we are here in Ecoregion 59. Woohoo! I like to have everyone know what ecoregion they're from. And what this is really saying is any of the genetics of the plants that are collected within Ecoregion 59 can be proliferated along that area. Now, this in no way is to say, plants from Ecoregion 58, if they come over to us, we're not trying to punish anyone or do anything like that. It's merely in an effort to highlight and educate what the importance is of maintaining this local genetic diversity. As we've seen, maintaining wild and local diversity is very important for making sure we have the right genetics to adapt to whatever comes in the future. So this map from the EPA, you can zoom in further and get to 59G, which talks about the coastal areas and so forth. But for right now, we're using this as a framework to put the right plants back in the right place. So the next slide, I am the lead of the Pollinator Health Initiative, the Ecotype Project for CT NOFA, which is the Northeast Organic Farming Association. And so they, as their mission says, is to ensure the growth and viability of organic agriculture, organic food, and organic land care in Connecticut. We envision a healthy organic Connecticut founded on ecologically, socially, and economically just principles. So if you go to the next slide, in an effort to, if you see, and since we're talking about farming, if you see this blueberry bush, this is what it looks like on these farms when it doesn't have proper pollination. You can see the berries on the left look small and green, and they don't get ripe and plump like the ones on the right. The ones on the right were visited by bees and pollinators. The ones on the left were not. So that is why NOFA said, you want to know what? We really need to get behind the issue of our pollinators, because they're the ones doing all the heavy lifting on our farms. And if we don't have them there, then we don't have a viable business, local food, or healthy ecosystems. So if you go to the next slide, we started this project, and well, let me back up. So the Ecotype Project is funded under a USDA specialty crop block grant, where our specialty crop is the seeds. So what you see here is the beautiful organic farm, the Hickories in Ridgefield, Connecticut. And these are our founder plots. And I'll walk you through how we get to them. But these are grown with wild collected native pollinator seed. And what we're doing here is another seed saving strategy. And I believe, this is the one that we all strive for here. This is in situ, which means in the place where it belongs. And this is in the living seed bank, or our soils. So we want to make sure that these plants exist on the landscape so that, again, that word anemockery, when the wind blows, they're dispersed and they can live in our seed soil profile to grow and proliferate to provide food and habitat for our pollinators. And the more diversity of these plants we have on our lands, the more diversity we have for our pollinators. And again, it's very important to have these habitats on farms to make sure that we all have the local organic food that is so delicious and important for health and nutrition. So the next slide talks a little bit more about ecotype. So what is an ecotype? Well, an ecotype is a reference to the fact that that seed's genetics was harvested and collected locally. So an ecotype just refers to the very specific species and variety that references the adaptation in the genetics of place. So when we collect ecotypes from Stonington, that would be a Stonington ecotype, right? And then the same for everywhere throughout ecoregion 59. And so ecotypes are important because, again, they're adapted to our local terroir. They're adapted to our pests. They're more hardy. They don't have as many disease problems, and we're making sure we're maintaining that genetic diversity. And this is all very important, as you'll see in. Well, actually, before we go to the next slide, so we want to make sure that we're putting these natives and proliferating throughout the landscape. And there's a lot of questions about what's a native plant versus a nativar. So these truly local native plants have that wide genetic diversity. Often what we call nativars are those cultivars that we can buy in nurseries that all, are bred and selected for the uniformity or the aesthetics of how they look. Those are actually just propagated oftentimes by cuttings, which means that they're just duplicating that same genetics over and over again, which can cause genetic depressions and doesn't have that same vigor as truly local natives. And as the great author Doug Tallamy, who wrote the books Bringing Nature Home and Nature's Best Hope, when we look at these natives on our landscape, such as the oak tree that has 233 caterpillars on it that feeds all of, many of the local songbirds, we realize that having these plants is what's feeding our entire ecological web. So it's really important. Aesthetics certainly come into play. And as you saw in the founder plots, these ecotypes can be quite beautiful. So the next slide will show you, let's see, the next slide says when we're selecting these ecotypes, we want to make sure that we're selecting for bloom times throughout the season. I heard this wonderful woman from the South give a presentation about pollinators, and she said, when you plant pollinators in your landscape, she says, it's like if you invite a house guest over for a week, y'all, and you only feed them on Monday. We have to make sure that we're feeding them from early spring through late spring, summer, and fall. The Wild Seed Project is an excellent resource in terms of all things ecotype. They're based up in Maine, and they do, I believe it's quarterly, a great publication that just has gorgeous illustrations and beautiful resources like this that in a very clear and succinct way help make you understand why these bloom times matter, how to implement seeds, and so forth. So we really want to make sure that we pay attention to these bloom times because different pollinators will be coming to your habitats throughout the day, even at night, as I'll show you later, and throughout the season. And we want to make sure that we're providing nectar and pollen and habitat for them the whole time. And also I have an image of an edible forest garden in there. If we look at nature, it's not a monoculture, just one crop at one trophosphere or one level. We see many different levels. So we see ground covers and shrubs and vines and canopies. So as this project gets more funding and we can bring more species online, we do hope to then start working with shrubs and with trees because it's really important to be putting in these perennial polycultures because after we establish them, they become self-maintaining, self-perpetuating, self-regulating, mimicking natural ecosystems. As a permaculture educator, doing as much as we can to work off the patterns and principles of nature, biomimicry, is how we can be most successful as stewards and caretakers. We need to follow the lead of nature. So if you go to the next slide, a little bit about the process of how the Ecotype Project works. So we work with botanists, namely Jordy Elkins from Highstead Arboretum in Reading, and with the same ethics and protocols that I used when I was doing my wild seed collection out in Idaho, he knows how to identify wild stands, the sustainable amount to collect from. We want to make sure in promoting this project that citizen science and citizen involvement is very important, but actually having permissions to collect on wild land, knowing how much is too much. There's a lot of like respect and responsibility and honestly, legal paperwork that goes into doing these types of collections. So we encourage you to collect from your home plots, but understand the rules and regulations around the wild plots. But he will collect that wild seed from the species that we identify to bring into the pipeline. And then I work with organic farmers such as Dina, Brewster, and Jean and Abby, the wonderful volunteers there at the Hickories, and Andy at Stone Acres right up near you all, as we'll see in a little bit, to plant founder plots. Now, founder plots are 200 plants that we let grow, as I said before, for seed. So seeds, just like a fruit, have their peak ripeness. So they'll start out green and then they ripen up and get brown or different shades of a brown or a dark color until they desiccate out and are at full ripeness. And then I'll come in as the seed collector, collect that seed and give it to our nursery partners, such as Daryl Newman at Planter's Choice, who then makes it available for plant sales. The Aspetuck Land Trust down in Fairfield County and a local high school have been great and been able to get these plants out to homeowners. Certainly, as this project amplifies in the amount of seed we have, we're really excited to be working with more landscapers and even departments of transportation who just have huge swaths of land. And if we're able to put these truly local natives, the right plants in the right place on these huge areas, then we can really be doing the great work that the Pollinator Pathways initiatives have really been promoting in reducing fragmentation by fortifying these ecological corridors, by having way stations in as many backyards as possible and on as many public lands. When we think of ourselves as homeowners, we also need to think of ourselves as, land stewards and make sure that we're caretaking the outside of our house as well as we caretake the inside. So on the right-hand side, you can see some of the species we've worked with that we're currently working with. The Vernonia novaborensis, the New York ironweed, beautiful purple flowers, and tons of native bees. We have over 3,000 native bees. The Joe Pye weed, the swallowtail just loves that. The swamp milkweed, of course, we've all heard the love of the monarchs. It's important to note here in making sure that we're planting these truly local natives that sometimes when we plant, tropical or non-native milkweeds, they bloom too long, and monarchs actually have a 5-year-long migration. I call myself an endurance race ethnobotanist because I love to do hard and long and difficult things in support of plants. But if the monarchs are staying too long on these milkweeds, they're missing the bloom times further on down their migration or might end up somewhere too cold, and therefore we're doing maybe more harm than good. So and we also have the great pycnanthemums, the mountain mints, and common mountain mints. So really exciting. And if the next slide you can see, as that loads, I might have to, we have Andy, who is at Stone Acres right up there. And so they actually have one of our founder plots, and Jen is going to come back on and show a great little video she filmed with him.
Yes, give me 1 second to switch up the screen share. Okay, here we go. I'm going to share this video that we filmed just yesterday at the Ecotype farm plot here at Stone Acres. So let me cue that up now and put that full screen so we can see that. And here we go. Hey, Andy, how are you?
Good. How you guys doing?
Good, good, good. So we had you on because we wanted to talk to you a little bit about the work that you're doing with Connecticut NOFA and the Ecotype Farm Project. And I think you're outside at the farm plot right now, right?
Yep, that's it. I'm sitting here next to some ironweed.
Some ironweed. So what kind of a plant is ironweed?
Ironweed is just one of the native wildflowers we've got around here. Fortunately, it's got the word weed in its name, which has been the attitude towards a lot of native flowers that aren't, they're rather simple little things like this. Not big showy blooms, but they do play an important role for all of the native pollinators.
Gotcha. And so you're growing this native plant on the farm. Can you tell me a little bit about how that came to be and how you're, what you're growing them for?
Sure. So we got hooked up with Sefra, who is running the Ecotype project, and they want to grow some of these native wildflowers that they collected seeds from in a slightly more organized fashion on farms, so that they could come and collect the seeds from these plots to disperse to other growers, whether it's homeowners or nurseries, or I think someday even the highway department might be one of their potential clients for growing all of these wildflowers out and getting them more widely cultivated.
And so you're doing this at Stone Acres Farm. I'm going to put up the website, which is where you are a farmer and farm manager. Why is it important to grow plants like this on a farm?
Well, all of the native pollinators do a lot of work for any farm. So, whether you're talking about bees or certain types of wasps or flies, they all can help out with increasing production on the farm. There's lots and lots of different kinds of pollinators, and lots of our crops need pollination. So the more that we can attract to the property, the better.
Gotcha. So you get to grow out the plants on the farm, and then the seed is saved. But while it's growing there, it's benefiting, the other crops that you have on the farm as well.
Right.
Gotcha. Awesome. And so how long will it take before the seeds are ready to be saved?
Right now, these plants were just planted this past summer, and you can see that the seed heads are getting kind of dry on them. So I would give these a little bit longer until the little bristles at the top start to be a little bit easier to break off. And that means that the seed is pretty mature, and you could harvest it, dry it, save it, grow it next year. But I believe that we're going to give these plants at least another year to grow and put on some more size, and that way they'll have more seed heads to collect.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, it's such an interesting partnership, and I'm so glad that Stone Acres Farm is part of it.
Yeah, me too. I love these kinds of flowers.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Andy.
Yeah, no problem. See ya.
Bye. Hey, Andy, how are you?
Good. How you guys doing?
Good. So we had you on because we wanted to talk to a little bit about. Sorry, replay again. Okay.
Well, thank you so much for filming that, Jen. Andy, he has such a magnificent farm. I'm sure if all of you are up in that area, Stone Acres is really an extraordinary place and has delicious, delicious food and just beautiful ground. So I encourage you all to visit in a socially distant, appropriate way. But as we go back to the slideshow, I have a few more things I'd like to show you about what these founder plots actually look like and some of the fun pollinators that visit them. So if you go to the next slide, as I've said before, we have these two great volunteers, Jean and Abby at the Hickories, and they are budding entomologists, and I myself am not that well versed, but I'm learning quite a lot of the different names and so forth. But they have started cataloging all of these great friends that come to the plot, and they even go out at night with headlamps on. They use their red headlamp light on because the Rudbeckia herder, the black-eyed Susan, didn't seem to have so much activity during the day, and they went out at night and saw all these moths and everything. So really, these plots are like the wild safari. If you go and walk through them, it is just a buzz. It's so beautiful with all the diversity, and the more diversity of these plants we have, more that these beneficial insects are doing to get rid of the more harmful ones that we see. The ladybugs and the things come back and eat the aphids that are on the milkweeds, and there's all these amazing ecological cycles and systems that you get to see in play right before your eyes. So it's just this symphony of ecology that is such a delight to see. So that picture on the right was actually taken at night. So go outside and look at your pollinator plants at night. The next slide is just some more beautiful, you can see just the great diversity on these great ecotypes You see the yarrow in there and the white flowers. You'll see the Monarda fistulosa, the bergamot down in the bottom right, and we'll see the swamp milkweed up in the top left. The next slide is just some more beautiful photos. Just so much fun, and it's so great to see these pollinators happy in their environment. And when we harvest the seed, we just take off the seed heads and leave the stalk, because a lot of them overwinter in the stalks as well. So the next slide. So an effort under the USA grant to get more farmers and to amplify how much truly local seed we have, one of our deliverables for our grant was creating these farmer protocol packets. And so what we've bought is these metal 5x8, like those old index card boxes. And what we've done is we've created index cards on how to get started with these ecotypes for each of the different species. We also have a card with general growing protocols, general seed saving protocols, and then log cards where you're able to write down and track everything that's happening in your ecotypes. So, for example, this is the New York ironweed that Andy spoke to, and just tells you general establishment characteristics and their ecological benefits. So that helps them get established. And the next slide will show you, if you think back to that founder plot photo way at the beginning of this presentation with all the flowers in bloom. Now this is what it looks like when the flowers have gone to seed. So that is right now where we find ourselves. So I am a busy bee collecting seeds from all these different plots, because they don't all mature at the same time. Just like only some tomatoes will be red and ripe on the vine, you have to go back and harvest again. The same is true with seed collecting. So I'll go through several times as each of the flower heads, plant stalks reach their peak ripeness, and collect the seed, which I'll put into brown paper bags and put them in a cool, dark, dry area out of the sun, making sure they won't get eaten by anything. And I let them truly desiccate and dry out. So you don't want to pack too much seed in one bag. Then I get to go through the great maverick, female version of Sherlock Holmes process of cleaning seed, because each seed has different characteristics that you need to clean for. You can see the seed on that tray, like the dandelion of the Great Yellow Farmhouse, has that pappus, that helicopter-like part that makes it fly with the winds of animockery. And so I'll rub that to separate the seed fruit from the pappus. Now, at the home scale, it's perfectly fine to leave that pappus on. It doesn't do anything to inhibit germination, but when we're giving more seed over to larger growers, they prefer more clean seed. So there's winnowing and rubbing, and you can see those screens and sieves. And then you get to go through the fun process of stratification. These are wild seeds, so what do they need to do? They fall into our local soils. What happens then? It rains, it snows, it freezes, it thaws. So if we want to break their hibernation in order for them to germinate, we have to do what's called stratification. Most of these species are moist stratified. So you would take the seed and take a damp paper towel, you put the seed in it, make sure that's evenly distributed, and put it in your fridge. Some require 30 days, some require 60 days. And the next card, not yet, but that I'll show you, tells you the delineations and the distinctions between all of these different species. So after we stratify, there's also ways to do it where you can just winter sow. You can just throw the seed right back out into pots or into planters that you maybe cover with the screen so rodents don't eat it. And you can just let them winter outside and they should do great. Some of them need a little bit of light for germination, like Joe Pieweed, but again, you get to know the plants as you work with them. So after they're germinated again, you see that top picture, we have them for sale through the Ecotype project. So now we've been able to have plant sales where we're able to get these seeds to you all and to your landscape. The main tenet and the main mantra of seed saving is when you have your seeds, you want to make sure you keep them cool, dark, and dry. It doesn't really matter how cool, dark, and dry, but you just want to make sure it's at a constant temperature so that it's not an area of fluctuation, because that's what kind of messes with the seeds and gets it confused and thinks it's time to germinate. The next slide, again, is just kind of what I went over with you. Again, this is the ironweed. And so again, we've said how long you need to stratify, how long you should sow it, how early, so you can plant the plugs out the right period of time, the sowing depth, and then seed collection strategies, and then any pests and diseases to watch out for. So through the ctnofa.org/ecotype website, you'll be able to have access to ordering these getting started toolkits, which hopefully will be really helpful. And we can keep sending cards like those World Wildlife, inserts that they used to have a million years ago, where each year you get new seeds that come online. The next slide, just kind of getting to a wrap up here. I am a deeply passionate explorer and love to go on botanical expeditions. And so this just about, I would say 2.5 weeks ago, I went on the inaugural, or planned the inaugural botanical expedition. So I'm not a botanist, I'm a botanist. And what we did in an effort to highlight Ecoregion 59 was I took 9 of my friends, so we had 5 canoes, or 9 other fellow explorers. We had 5 canoes, 500 native plants. We went 87 miles, where John Ledyard started his famous journey at Dartmouth after dropping. He's Dartmouth's most famous dropout because he hung out with the indigenous tribes on the Canadian border, built a dugout canoe, canoed to his father's farm in Hartford, hitchhiked on a steamship and went on James Cook's expedition, and then crossed the Siberian land bridge. A true hero. So we started where he started and ended at the Massachusetts border in an effort, hopefully, to paddle the whole river. But it wasn't until after our 1.5 mile portage at Bellows Falls that we actually started putting in these pollinator gardens, because we were paddling for the pollinators. So we put in these pollinator gardens in an effort to highlight the importance of fortifying these ecological corridors with the right plants for the right place. Again, putting these species back where they belong to make sure that they're in our living seed bank profiles. Again, it was really encouraging because these are some of the most productive alluvial spills, and we saw farms all along the banks. And just to have that beautiful interplay of the wilderness to the cultivated land, and making sure we have these riparian buffers, or these habitats on farm that invite these pollinators to come in and help do the work that provides food security for us. We want to provide food security for the pollinators. So as a great lover of the wilderness, we don't just want to, we take in the beauty. We don't just want to take, we want to caretake. And in that sense, we want to give back. So I was able to carry a Wings World Class flag on this expedition. They're the leading female organization for supporting women in science and exploration. So a true honor. I carried a flag in the South Pacific as well, the same number 27. And I'm also a member of the Explorers Club to help promote and proliferate these really important conversations about citizen science. We don't need to get on planes to vast and faraway austere environments to go on amazing adventures and exploration. We can all really do this in our own backyard. Just take a couple native plants when you paddle, or some truly native seeds when you go for a run or for a hike, and we can all participate in this great conversation of conservation that's constantly happening around us. And it's really, paddling down this river, it reminds you of the great lineage of all the indigenous peoples who have used that as a thoroughfare for trade since forever, and the same thing for all the animals and all the insects. And as we paddle along those areas, we want to make sure that we're really facilitating that conversation and being a part of this great symphony of the beautiful wildlands, and making sure that we preserve them for all those that will paddle before, for all those that have paddled before us, for all those that shall paddle after us. So the next video we're going to share quickly, because I would love to leave at least a few minutes for questions. It's just a quick drone shot. You can see what the expedition looked like on the river. So it was just really beautiful. As I mentioned before, there's great words that talk about the different mechanisms of seed dispersal. There's hydrockery, which is the dispersal of seed by water. And oftentimes we think about seeds floating into the rivers or attaching to fish's eggshells, or their egg casings rather. There's a number of different ways that the river really helps to proliferate these seeds along the riparian areas. And anemochory, once again, along the wind. And then anthropochory, the spread of seed by us, the humans. So I have 2 last slides to show you. Then we have 5 minutes or so for questions. And the last slides really just speak to, well, that was us flying. We sailed a flag on the expedition, or sailed a sail, which actually was really fun and helped a lot with our own personal animockery. So the next slide just talks to the fact that a great mentor, Bill McDorman, who runs the Rocky Mountain Seed Alliance, and they do great online seed schools if you want to learn more about seed saving, from just saving seeds in your backyard to starting a seed company. He takes a seed and a cell phone. He says, which of these has more technology? And he says, the seed, because it's able to, hibernate for decades or years and then proliferate and have this amazing ROI of thousands of seeds and adapt to different soils and different climates and different pests. And so it's really the extraordinary embryos that when you hold them in their hands should be revered. And so whether there's tomatoes or flowers or something in your landscape that you love, look for its seed, become a seed huntress or hunter, and look and find that seed and safeguard it, because that's how heirlooms throughout all time have been saved in land races. And you selecting what you like for your taste and for your family, then you create your own heirloom. So Bill McDormand says that we are the people of the pinch. He says we're at a pinch of time when we can either stand by and watch this great genetic erosion of our biodiversity, or we can stand in as stewards and we can caretake these embryos, again, for, in reverence to all those that have caretaken it before us and for all those that come after us. So I say save seeds, because seeds save, and I can't wait to hear all of your seed saving stories. Thank you so much.
Wow, I'm kind of overwhelmed and blown away with all of the information that you shared. Thank you so much. It's so fascinating to think about that idea of the stories that a seed tells, and the history, and then also all of the future that it holds for us. I think that is really remarkable. And, I think when we see plants go to seed, you think, oh, it's time to get rid of it, but it's all about where you find your beauty and what you're sort of valuing and looking for. One of the questions I had, and I hope others post questions as well, I'd love to ask questions from those watching if you have them. But one of the questions I had was about the ecoregions, and specifically as it relates to climate change. And does the idea of native plants shift or change over time as our climate changes? Are the plants that are, like, when we talk about the right plant for the right place, is that changing? Is the right plant changing for this place, or do we consider native plants? How do you define a native plant at this point?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question, and certainly amongst the native plant and conservation world, you will find a great arc of responses into the way that people think about that. For me personally, and what a lot of my colleagues and I have been talking about, is just like we wanted to maintain those wild plots, to maintain the adaptations of that wild genetic diversity, like when we were doing the taro work and so forth. I think it's really important to maintain the wild native plants that are in a South Carolina, or that are up in Canada, or that are here, so that whichever way the climate shifts, then we know which pools of genetics might be best adapted and most adaptable to rebreed or to come up north. I think, there's a lot of talk about bringing those plants up now. I think, sure, anything we can do to get more plants on the landscape, that's great. And certainly it's great to experiment and to see what is going to do well and what is going to be resilient. So I don't think there's, a problem with that. But the only tenet that we stand true to is just making sure that the wild populations and the wild stands that exist here do have their place and are conserved and are proliferated for all of the, entomological buddies that we have that are adapted to those specific species. But I think certainly that's why it's important to maintain those different vestiges or those different plots and populations as we go down the coast or across the country, so that we can say, it's starting to get a little bit colder and drier. This is now reminiscent of this, this ecoregion. So let's try those seeds. And then, we have more, I wouldn't say pure, it's not the right word, but more bioregionally and ecoregionally adapted seed to work with.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. There was a question about foraging, which I think you kind of answered, which I think was this idea of, should people be looking to forage native seeds for for, to replant. And what you're saying is not necessarily to do that. So I wanted to post a couple of resources where if somebody wanted to, like you said, bring native seed with you as you go in your adventures to plant, should they be purchasing those native seeds or collecting from their own gardens?
Yeah, I think collecting from your own gardens is great. I mean, I think, so a couple things there. So there's the Xerxes Society, there's Native Plant Trust, there's the Wild Seed Project. Depending on where you're located, there are different resources that do have local ecotype seeds. Fruition Seeds is an amazing seed company that does great tutorials that are Northeast adapted seeds. And so I think like looking for those New England ecotypes, that's, definitely the preferred method. But if you have these native plants in your landscape and you go to save seeds, I would say, sure, proliferate those along, areas. But the only thing is, and I have to be wary of this because there's, the guerrilla gardening and all of those things, which in a world without rules, of course, we would all love to do, but we have to be mindful of where you're collecting. If you're on public lands or state parks or land trusts, you do need permission from those people to be able to collect. If you're in, home gardens or friends' lands or land that who the owners are and they're fine with it, then that's great. And most of the time, those wild stands that we'll find are the right species or are well enough suited and adapted to be proliferated. You do want to make sure that you know the difference between the natives and the invasives, because we don't want to start proliferating invasives around. But yeah, I encourage you, if you have friends who have some pollinator plants in their backyard, say, hey, can I collect some seed off of that? And then it's really fun to plant them in beautiful little places and have pollinators pop up all around your daily routes.
I love that. And then one more question I had about finding native plants for our own home landscapes. So when you go to your like local garden center, first of all, native plants can be tricky to find. Not all garden centers are growing them. Do we also want to be looking for native plants that were bred or grown from native seeds, from Connecticut seeds? And do growers know that?
Well, that's the ideal. That's what we're aiming for. So CT NOPA is largely an educational organization. So really, other than putting this pipeline together, what our true impetus is to make the buyers and make people aware of what these ecotypes are. And in that sense, it will encourage the nursery growers and a lot of these great native plant nurseries like Earth Tones and so forth, who do this work, to be more encouraged to label their plants and their seeds that way so that the buyer could be more informed. So what our intention is in the future with the Ecotype Project, again, as it gets more funding, is to help, collate a directory of where the nurseries are, who's doing this work, who has these seeds and these native seeds available, and really just making that more of a not marketing for marketing's sake, but marketable so that the buyer can recognize the Ecotype logo or concept, so that you're putting the right plants in the right place, and you can know the story of the how and the why those plants got there. So that's definitely our intention. But certainly through the Ecotype Project now, we do plant sales in our fall just wrapped up. We'll be doing another in the spring. And hopefully more groups are starting to offer those plant sales and working with our nurserymen that we work with to make those more available.
That's great. And consumer demand can be so helpful in driving change as well. So asking for native seeds and plants grown from native seeds, I'm sure we'll start to get those wheels turning.
Yep. Absolutely. And it really has been so encouraging. Again, the pollinator pathway, I'm not sure if it's up in Stonington, but it probably is. They've done such an amazing job of just every time we see the women who run it, there's 5 new towns that have joined. And so they've really just kind of paved the way for us, for people really understanding the importance of pollinators. And now it's kind of like we go from intramural sports to varsity kind of conversation of like, all right, now we all know that pollinators, we need them back in our landscape, and native plants are important, but let's talk about what natives and where and bloom times and all the other nuance of it. And so it's been really exciting because it brings everyone to the table. It brings botanists to the table and farmers to the table and departments of transportation and landscapers and farmers. And we're all really all in it together, right? And I think it's the kind of, it takes a village, and it's so true with ecology and conservation as well. So it's been such a privilege to meet all of these people who are doing the hard work, and I'm kind of working as the mycelium, like the wood wide web, right? The fungal network that helps the fruiting bodies and transfer nutrients, for another talk. But that's what I've had the joy of bringing together all these people who do all this great work to facilitate this ecotype project pipeline to all come together to make these plants available and on the landscapes.
I love that. Sefra, thank you so much. I posted the Connecticut NOFA website and your website for more information. I'm going to post our email and also our Instagram handle. Should you have any questions about this talk or any resources that we can help you find that were mentioned in the talk, please reach out. Thank you, Sefra, so much for sharing your time tonight. This was absolutely fascinating. I really appreciate it.
It was an absolute pleasure, and I hope to seed you all soon. Good night.
Good.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Sefra. Bye.
Bye, everyone.